Hi everyone, and I just want to say thank you for joining us this evening. I'm delighted to be chairing this event, Ireland's, and also I'm delighted to be part of Ireland's Future. Ireland's Future has published this document, Preparing for a Strong Economy in a New Ireland, and continues to lead on the question of constitutional change. This is our third discussion in 4 months, and we're currently working on others to be released later on this year. We were really delighted actually recently to have facilitated the conversation on a new Ireland being a warm house for all, where we provided a platform for those who weren't from a traditionally nationalist or United Ireland background, but who are now saying it's time to have the conversation about what things might look like in Ireland in the years ahead. Identity, citizenship, nationality, etc. They're all very important parts of the broad discussion. But questions are being asked about how a United Ireland might positively impact on the everyday lives of people here, and particularly with reference to jobs, pensions, inward investments, and the broad economy. People are asking how much financial pain will there be in the time ahead. And if we don't look at a new and better economic structures and approaches across the entire Ireland. So I'm delighted to be joined by my three senior figures, three colleagues of mine from Ireland's Future: Patricia McBride, Chris Donnelly, and Brian Feeney. So you're all very welcome. And I'd like to start with yourself, Patricia, if that's okay. So first I'll say this is an absolutely excellent document. It's well researched and provides many of the questions that are currently being asked, as well as asking more questions, particularly around government preparation. But for you, what's, I suppose, the one thing that stands out for you in this document?
First of all, what stands out for me is the accessibility of the document in its entirety, because none of us are economists, but this gives us a way to look at economic issues in a very plain, straightforward language that I think a lot of people will be able to understand, and it's not baffling. But what stands out for me is how this document breaks down the economic subvention to the north and what it really, really means, because I think that is probably the biggest economic fear factor to reunification, is that people think the north is going to cost 10 billion, 11 billion, whatever it is, per year in subsidies. And that's really not the case at all. So if you look at the most recent estimates from 2017, 2018, the cost of the subvention from Westminster was £9.2 billion. But I think what we need to realise is that some of the bills that the North has in respect of its financial responsibilities would disappear in the scenario of reunification, and those would be costs that would be in relation to international services, defence spending, and servicing of UK debt liabilities, and that's going to reduce the subvention by about 25% in the first instance, according to Bergen and McGuinness research from ESRI in 2020. As well as that, if you look at the most recent report on annual spending on pensions in the north, you're looking at a cost of about £3.2 billion. So that leaves you with an annual cost of £3.6 billion, which is a lot of money. But when you consider that the Irish government spending increased by an average of about €2.72 billion each year in the period from 2014 to 2019, this isn't really a huge amount of money. And when you take into consideration as well that the EU and the United States, who were both stakeholders in the peace process and who both have a vested interest in ensuring that the island of Ireland continues to enjoy peace and prosperity. Those are countries that could be looked at to assist, I suppose, in terms of inward investment for the addressing of future issues around structural development and economic inequalities in the north. So I think it actually paints a very, very positive picture. And that's not even taking into consideration the benefits of access to an increased workforce, harmonisation of corporation tax, all of the other things that would benefit the Republic of Ireland in terms of increasing its GDP in the event of reunification. So I think for me, what stands out is the simple formula by which the true cost of reunification can be calculated, and how we begin to put in place mitigations around those costs and around streamlining services in the public sector, whether that be in health or education or other areas of life where government provides support to its citizens. So I think it's a good news story.
Thanks very much, Patricia. And Brian, the document references health services north and south. It's been suggested that the NHS in the north could be the issue upon which some people will decide how they vote in the referendum. So I'm just wondering, what's your view on the NHS and the claim that Republic couldn't compete with the advantage of free medicine in the north?
Yes, NHS is almost always cited as a great advantage, and whether or not the Republic could afford to have something similar, and why people would automatically vote not to go into an All-Ireland because of the NHS. But most of that now is referring to what used to be the case 20 years ago. The NHS now is not what it was and doesn't deliver anything like what people claim it delivers. I mean, for example, before the pandemic, the waiting list in the north for people to have a first appointment with a consultant was 95,000 people waiting for more than 52 weeks to get a first appointment, an outpatient appointment. The waiting list in England at the same time was 3,500. Now, that means, incredibly, the North's waiting list was 26 times bigger than England's waiting list. And in England's population is 30 times, more than 30 times bigger than the population in the North. So the idea that you simply went along and got free operations and so on just doesn't work anymore. The NHS in the North is short of 3,000 nurses. There was an exodus of nurses and other medical staff after Brexit, and particularly in the last 18 months, when people were concerned that they wouldn't have a right to stay, that there would be all kinds of problems about being able to work in the North. But even without Brexit, there has been a shortage of nurses for years, and the structure of the National Health Service is simply not delivering for people. And one of the reasons it's not delivering is that the North simply has fallen so far behind because the Barnett formula that the British government operates for allocating resources to Scotland, Northern Ireland, other parts of the UK, the Barnett formula is in many ways designed to, it's skewed in favour of the prosperous areas of the UK. And the result of that has been, particularly in the last 20 years, the gap between funding for devolved services and funding for central government services and the funding in the prosperous areas in the southeast of England, the gap has been widening. For example, between 2000 and 2014, the gap between the prosperous areas and the north has widened in terms of GDP. It's widened by 44% in those 14 years. It's much wider now. So there isn't the money to invest in the health system. It's just not there. What we're also seeing is increasing reliance on All-Ireland medicine. For example, there's only one lithotripter in the whole of Ireland. That's for kidney stones, it smashes kidney stones. There are, for example, specialist cancer treatments out in the Gelvin, the people from the whole of the Northwest use. Acute pediatric cardiac services now operate in Dublin. So in many ways, there actually is an all-Ireland medical system starting, and it should be expanded a great deal more and a great deal faster. But the idea, the fundamental idea of the National Health Service that it is free at the point of delivery no longer operates in the north because there is no delivery for many people. If you're waiting for orthopedic work, for example, on a knee joint or a new hip joint or a cataract treatment, you could be waiting 3 to 5 years. The same applies to a chronic gynecological problems. Someone needs hysterectomy. It's years. The result of that is anyone who can in the north now pays. If you can't pay, you're waiting 3 to 5 years for things like I mentioned, those orthopedic procedures. Many people will die before they get those procedures. So there's no good saying it's free at the point of delivery when there's no delivery.
Thanks. Thanks, Brian. I mean, there's no doubt about it. There are many failures in both the NHS and Southern healthcare system. And I do agree that we should be looking for in a new Ireland, a universal healthcare system that will provide first-class healthcare for all citizens free at the point of delivery. So Chris, yeah, I just wanted to, the document references the disparity between educational attainment rates between North and South. The North's educational attainment rates are behind the South's. There are more early school leavers in the North. So I'm wondering, why do you think that gap exists?
I think, first of all, Francis, if I could just say, I would encourage everyone tuning in to read this document. I think it's an excellent document. A lot of work has gone into it. And I think part of what we're about in this document, and we're seeing a lot at the moment, we're exposing and countering many lazy narratives that were allowed to develop over many, many years to try to shoot down and dismiss the idea that a United Ireland was a viable project. I mean, what Patricia's been talking about there with regard to subvention, what Brian's been talking about with regard to health provision and the economy, we know that we're in a very different place in 2021 than we were even 20, 30, 40 years ago. Many things are possible now. And really, this isn't just about, I'm going to talk about the educational provision and the difficulties that we're seeing with regard to North-South in terms of achievement. But what we're also saying, this isn't about talking down what's been happening in the North, the many shortcomings. It's about saying with regard to that health, with regard to reducing the subvention, the best way to do that is to be developing and articulating and realizing policy on an all-Ireland level. Whether, those health areas that Brian talked about, that should just be the beginning of the way that political parties and the government and Stormont approach these issues to deliver so that we do have that at the point of delivery, a free model for everyone across the island in terms of health. With regard to, because I know you asked me about education, Francis, and apologies, I had to get that out of the system. But in terms of education, I do think it's important to say this, across Ireland, Irish people are very proud and very loyal to the local school communities that have served them so well, from nursery, primary, post-primary. It's something Irish people are very proud. They're rooted in local communities. They tend to be very attached to their schools. And I think with good reason. If we look at international studies, we can see throughout primary schools where a lot of if you look at the TIMMS, the TIMS international studies, we have reason to be proud. I think particularly in Northern Ireland, our children perform very well in terms of maths and in terms of science at that level when they're at the end of primary schooling. And even in the Republic, we can see that similar levels of achievement. But something happens, Francis, over the course of the next 7 years, which means when our children get to the point of being young adults, of leaving the school environment to enter the world of life and the workplace, unfortunately, far too many of them in the North are not equipped. They're ill-prepared. We have not given them skills. And we know the reason. I mean, someone like Brian, who's been in education all his life, knows the reason why. It's the manner, a large part of the problem is the manner in the North in which we organise our post-primary schooling. And that makes it even more difficult to deliver, to bring along in terms of skills and educational outcomes for children who are perhaps less academically able, perhaps from working class, socioeconomic deprived communities. And that now we're seeing a real chasm developing between North and South in terms of the percentage of children who leave school too early in the North, who then when they leave, they're what's called this terrible phrase, NEETs, which means they're not in education, they're not in employment, they're not in training. They're on a path which is not going to be really equipping them to be contributors to society, and all sorts of problems arise from that. And that's something that we as a society in the North need to address. And of course, planning on an all-Ireland basis can help to deliver. One of the things we could see already in terms of the North is the third level provision. And there's already a campaign around a university in Derry. And I think that's something which Stormont and the Irish government need to get behind, and need to actually make these priority policies to actually deliver upon them, because of the difference they can make in these areas are so profound.
Yes, thanks, Chris. I mean, education is one of the most important issues that will have to be addressed. Foreign investment has been vital to the growth of the southern economy, and this has been attracted by the availability of an educated workforce. So I totally agree. Patricia, I'll come back to yourself. News emerged yesterday that there'll be a focus on a Belfast to Dublin economic corridor. Leading economic commentator David McWilliams has spoken previously on one of our events about the importance of that economic corridor. So just wondering, can you give us some idea as to how that would positively impact on the economy?
Well, I think it's really a positive sign that we see 8 local authorities, north and south, cooperating on economic development for the region. And that needs to be backed up with infrastructure development by government. So we need to be seeing things like a high-speed rail link between Belfast and Dublin, but we need to see that that extends out from that arterial route, and that we see the branches going out to the northwest, to the west coast, to economically deprived regions of, of Sligo, Leitrim, Roscommon, into the south area, into Cork in the south. So we need this to be an all-island approach. So this should only be one of a number of corridors where we're looking at, skills or services that are prevalent in those communities. For example, if you look in Mid-Ulster, the growth in manufacturing in the Mid-Ulster region has meant that there's a huge apprenticeship program for young people who want to work in skilled trades, whether that be plumbing, electrical, mechanical, engineering, and welding and things like that. So there's another potential economic corridor that we can look at that goes sort of through Cavan, Monaghan, Tyrone, Fermanagh, and into the west. So, there's a huge potential here. The Dublin-Belfast economic corridor has the capacity to draw on a potential workforce of around 2 million people. And you see an area where there are about 125,000 firms, and for entrepreneurship levels, and the survival rates of businesses are very high when you look in comparison to the national average. In terms of how that impacts on the reunification debate, the interesting thing there is that studies have found that, that there is a causal link between peace agreements and an increase in foreign direct investment. And that's something that these economic corridors are intending to promote, is the capacity for not only foreign direct investment, but also harnessing and tapping into the latent domestic investment and entrepreneurship of people in the community by providing supports for those growth and Indigenous businesses. And if you look after the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, there's a huge increase in foreign direct investment in the Republic of Ireland. Taking that on to the next level, to the reunification scenario, we've seen the research that's laid out in this report, and I'll just reiterate what Chris said before. People should read this report. It's deliberately kept short at around 20 pages so that it's not intimidating. It's not loads of numbers and loads of data. It's something that can be easily digested in an evening. But looking back, at the research that's in there, if you look at the potential in a reunification scenario where during the first 7 years of reunification, you could see a potential per capita increase in income of around 3,800 euros. And that would provide a boost to the economy on a number of levels. That would include a growth in cross-border trade. Reunification would provided growth in cross-border trade as a result of more integrated all-island economy and the removal of tariff barriers and, you know, the harmonisation of tax and regulatory systems. And that's something that's particularly relevant in the context of Brexit, because we are in a transition period. We are in a scenario where there are difficulties in the transition period and in the Northern Ireland Protocol. A United Ireland scenario would remove those. We'd also see better access to streams of educated workforce. If you come out of Dublin Airport on a Monday morning and you turn right, it's taking you an hour to get to Sandyford Industrial Estate, where some of the biggest firms, biggest international firms have their Irish or European headquarters. If you turn left, you're in Newry in 50 minutes. You know, so this is a no-brainer for large companies. So I think that the opportunity that's presented by the Dublin-Belfast economic corridors, and also by, you know, the development of further economic corridors and the harmonisation of tax structures north and south, is something that can build upon the knowledge economy that we already have on the island of Ireland and encourage more business, but more importantly, support Indigenous businesses, because there's a huge level of innovation and entrepreneurship on this island that I think we haven't fully tapped into. So we have the opportunity to do that. The EU and the United States, who are stakeholders in this process, will help to support the development of the infrastructure that is needed, in my view.
Yeah. Yes. Thanks for that, Tricia. I mean, I live in a city with a massive housing and transport crisis, where the average rent is $1,700 per month, and we badly need to free up underused land. There's 640 acres of prime land occupied by Dublin Port. You know, the Dublin-Belfast corridor has half the population of the island and will be the most commercially significant part of the country. So by moving Dublin Port to Drogheda, it would free up much needed land in Dublin for housing. Chris, can I come to yourself again? It's been widely commented that there was a broader acceptance from contributors to the Clareburn live show than ever before as to the need to begin preparations for unity. So I'm just wondering, what is it that's likely to entail, and what should we be looking out for in the time ahead?
Francis, I think very many people who will be watching this will have watched the Clareburn live show earlier during the week, and they will have been fascinated, and they will have detected a shift in tone, and I think and also substance, particularly on behalf of the Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil spokespersons, who of course very significant figures in Micheál Martin and Leo Varadkar. And I think I would put it this way: for so long now, very many people, supporters of Irish unity, were intensely frustrated with what I call the mañana answer. It'll always wait till tomorrow. It's too soon. It's too soon. We can't have that conversation. And some of that, I think, was cynical. It was a delaying tactic. It was a sense that this is going to be something we're going to have to put our shoulder to the wheel. We don't want to do that with too much else to be at, so we'll just put it for something for the future. What was significant about that programme the other day, and it started from the beginning with Leo Varadkar, with Mary Lou McDonald, it was very clear that there is a recognition and acceptance within Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil that they need to be taking more substantive positions on Irish unity. And what that needs to look like, and what I think that people need to keep an eye on for now, is how that translates into actually the development and articulation of actual policies. You know, I spoke about earlier, I know Brian spoke about earlier in terms of health, I was speaking about earlier in education. There are the range of areas that an Irish government could take the lead at in terms of developing, researching, and then getting the public policy. There are so much even to mention within education. We can talk about teacher professional development. We can talk about curriculum harmonization north and south. Talk about actual effective strategies to tackle underachievement. Looking at special needs there are so many areas, and it is the same with regard to the economy, with the infrastructure of the island, with transport, with agriculture. There are so many issues there, but we actually now need to see delivery. And I noted the other night, it was very interesting when Micheál Martin spoke. He did kind of defensively say how much money he'd been putting into research with regard to the ESRI, looking at some of these areas. But I think now we need to say, well, if the shared island unit is to mean anything, it's to mean that has to, the process of actually just looking at areas has to be expedited. So it leads to the point of the Taoiseach and the Irish government actually saying, okay, here are actual policy areas with regard to the economy, education, infrastructure, agriculture, where we're going to propose taking forward ourselves, but also taking forward with Stormont and with the local government. And I think that was important. I know Patricia and yourself alluded to that. I think it's very important, the Dublin-Belfast economic corridor. And this is also a vision thing. And you made reference, Francis, to the Dublin port issue. I mean, that's something that I know David McWilliams has been speaking about a lot. I mean, that would take a period up to 2 decades. But we're talking about the future of Ireland here going for the next half century. That's a massive thing in terms of the vision of Dublin as an affordable place for people to live. The 15-minute city idea, making it a reality. These are big picture things which I think people are very, very excited about. And they want all the political parties to now take ownership of it in a serious way starting today, not, as I said earlier, with the manana approach. We need to get rid of that now, and we need to see concrete evidence that everyone is now serious about planning.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Chris. I come to yourself, Brian. Much has been said about how United Ireland could positively impact on the lives of the people here, but much preparation still remains to be done, as we know. And Ireland's Future have suggested for some time that a citizens' assembly is the best way to navigate our way to the issues and arrive at a people-centred set of recommendations. So can you talk to us a little bit about what an all-Ireland citizens' assembly would look like, and what are the other measures that the government should be currently undertaking?
I think one of the reasons why a citizens' assembly is important is that an all-Ireland proposal, because there would have to be referendums both sides of the border, an all-Ireland proposal cannot belong to a political party. It can't even belong to a government, which is a coalition, because unless you get a national effort which involves everyone, there's always going to be an argument about what's the proposal and so on. There are going to be referendums, so the people should be involved in devising what those referendums should be about. There are various models for having citizens' assemblies, but the main thing is it isn't going to be something which belongs to one political party. That just cannot be the case. And that's one of the reasons for proposing it. If it's people-centered, if it's going to be something which is voted on in referendums, then the people have to be involved. As I say, there are various models for doing it. For example, selecting people from the electoral register, north and south. There has to be one citizens' assembly. You can't have two, where you have two proposals differing on all sorts of explanations of what sort of United Ireland there should be. Also, if there's a citizens' assembly, it's more likely that unionists from the north who aren't members of a political party will participate in that, because we know from the past any attempt to get an all-Ireland arrangement, for example, like the New Ireland Forum in the 1980s, the unionists wouldn't cooperate, wouldn't take part in it, because it was political parties that chose people. This will not be the case in the Citizens' Assembly. It will not be political parties choosing the participants. But the thing about a Citizens' Assembly is they have to be presented with expert figures, details, statistics. And this is where an Irish government comes in, because the Irish government must produce those figures. As Chris was saying, the time is long past when they say, well, you know, it's too early, we shouldn't do it, this is not the right time. It's up to the Irish government to research all the details about, for example, official figures on living standards, north and south, comparisons of the quality of life, the different public services, health, education, social benefits, welfare, all that has to be produced and presented to a citizens' assembly, and it should be in public and everyone can comment on it and discuss it. There has to be an Irish government produced all-Ireland economic or macroeconomic structural model, so that the government can say, this is where there will be an impact, for example, on productivity in the north, which is notoriously low. These are areas in the north would have to be targeted in a transition period. How long would that transition period be? 5 years, 10 years? the Irish government has got to produce proposals which can be put to the people as a whole and put to a citizens' assembly, so that the citizens' assembly can take decisions on that basis. As Chris was saying, there's no point in saying, oh, well, in due course we'll do this. The Scottish government, for example, they produced a booklet, really, over 600 pages, answering all those questions so that people knew what they were going to vote on. Here, so far, the government has produced nothing. And it's no good saying, oh, we'll do it sometime whenever somebody calls a border poll. Those kind of details that I'm talking about, for example, producing an all-Ireland macroeconomic structural model, which can be worked out over a period of years, that's no good. Those kind of things just can't be produced out of a hat because somebody says there's a border poll. People have got to know what it means about their pensions, what the currency will be, what about health, education, all those other matters. So it's no longer enough for any party to say this is not the right time. This is the right time.
Okay. I mean, like in the South, we've seen the benefits of a citizens' assembly when it came to considering the issue of abortion. And even though, you know, there were many different views on this subject, there was a general agreement on the conclusions arrived. So we've come to the end, unfortunately. I suppose I just want to say thank you to you all. This is a phenomenal report. I would encourage as many people as possible to read it. The conversation this conversation today reinforces the need for planning and preparing for constitutional change. The process of information gathering and planning should commence without delay. And given the level of resources required to do this, the planning process can only effectively be conducted at governmental level. And we have to, you know, there's a chance to work together on this island to prepare the way for transformative change. And it's our belief, and it's Ireland's Future's belief, that we have a duty to do the planning and preparing now. So anybody who's out there, please look at this report. It's a phenomenal piece of work, and we encourage you to read it. So thank you all very much it was lovely seeing you all, and hopefully someday we'll get to meet in person. Great to talk to you all, and thanks so much. Go Ramila Mahagov.
Well, sure.
Thanks, Francis.